Welcome to the Disabled Podcast, starring your host, Christian Reitz.
Hot dog, let's go!
Welcome to the Disabled Podcast, the show that incorporates disabilities with the magic of Disney. Welcome to episode number 9, entitled Disney 101 Part 2, to transfer or not to transfer. Be sure to use our hashtag the Disabled Podcast when sharing this podcast to all of your social media platforms. Now again, that's hashtag the Disabled Podcast when sharing this podcast to all social media platforms. And now, here is your host, Christian Reitz. What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of the Disabled Podcast. Honestly, guys, I gotta be real. It's been a few weeks since I've done a podcast. Normally, I would do it every 2 weeks, but over the last couple weeks, I've been having some work-related things that have come up. Also, I've been having some health issues, like a little bit of sickness in the last week. This episode that I'm doing this week was actually supposed to come last week, but unfortunately, I was sick. Had just a little bit of sinus pressure, nothing too major. So I was not able to do a podcast last week. So this week, you're getting the podcast just as I planned it. And this week's episode, we're actually going to do a continuation on what we talked about last time in our episode of Disney 101. But we're going to do a part 2. And this week, we're calling it To Transfer or Not to Transfer. And we're going to talk about all the rides in each of the individual theme parks that you can transfer on, or you can actually put your wheelchair on the ride. Now, this is a special podcast that is exclusive for my friends with mobility issues, whether you're in a wheelchair or a walker or a scooter. So you want to make sure that you pay attention. Now, I'm not going to mention every single ride in all the theme parks that you can transfer, that you have to transfer out of your wheelchair onto the ride vehicle, or that you can stay in your wheelchair on. I'm just going to give you a few highlights from each individual park of some of my favorite rides that I have been able to either stay in my wheelchair on or transfer on. So right now, let's get on with the episode. All right, so let's go ahead and talk about transferring and not transferring when it comes to Disney attractions and rides. Now, as soon as I say transferring and not transferring, there might be somebody listening to this podcast or watching up on YouTube and saying, wait a minute, but I thought Disney was accessible. And while I do say, yes, that is true, they are absolutely inclusive within the accessibility guidelines for ADA. There are some rides that are in each Disney theme park that are actually not accessible. In other words, where you cannot pull your chair up onto the ride vehicle itself. But have no fear, there are some rides that you actually can pull your ride vehicle or pull your wheelchair, onto the ride vehicle itself. And so again, what I've learned is that there are some rides that you can do, and there's some rides that you can't do. Now, of course, for me personally, and again, I'm not speaking for every disabled person who is in a wheelchair or anything like that in the world. For me personally, though, I'm one of those people that if I think a ride is interesting, like if I look it up on YouTube, because somebody might post it up on YouTube, usually what I'll do is I'll usually go watch the ride point of views, or usually ride POVs of that specific ride. And if it seems like a ride that I'm interested in, whether or not I need to transfer on it, or I can stay in my wheelchair, doesn't really matter to me because I really want to be able to experience that ride just like any other guest would. So again, this is really up to kind of what I would say, and some of my tips and tricks, and some of my pieces of advice for somebody. Again, this is really my advice. If you have some really, I guess you would say, some discrepancies on that, again, your trip is your trip. So you want to make sure you plan it for your family and for your person in your family who is affected by disability. So again, these are just some of my favorite rides and some of my favorite attractions that I transfer out of my wheelchair to get onto the ride vehicle, and then some that I actually stay in my wheelchair on for the entire ride. So again, this is just up for my brain and for what I love. But again, every Disney vacation is different, so you want to make sure that you plan exactly for the experience that you are looking for. Now, when it comes to the different theme parks of transferring and not transferring, and rides and attractions that you can use with your wheelchair and one that you have to transfer on, I would always recommend places like Magic Kingdom or Epcot, um, or even Animal Kingdom too. And now Animal Kingdom is only one ride, which I will get that to that in just a moment. But I want to start in places like Hollywood Studios, because in Hollywood Studios, some of the rides, or I should say all the rides there, are not accessible. In other words, meaning you cannot put your chair on the ride vehicle. If you're in a wheelchair or a scooter, you will have to transfer onto those rides. And so those would be like Mickey and Minnie's Runaway Railway, Toy Story Midway Mania, Rise of the Resistance, the Millennium Falcon Smuggler's Run, and certain rides like that. Tower of Terror is another one in those areas. Now, for those types of parks where I can't really put my wheelchair on the ride vehicle, or if you maybe not feel comfortable, if you're somebody who's taking a trip to Hollywood Studios and you don't feel comfortable putting your transferring out of your wheelchair to get onto the ride vehicle, though that park specifically would be the best park for the shows like Beauty and the Beast live on stage, the new Little Mermaid show, which I just saw and is amazing. And I'll highlight that in a future episode and talk to you about some of the new shows that are out that have been announced, and some of them that I've actually gotten to experience myself. And so you can see that there are some really different things you can do in Hollywood Studios if you do not want to transfer out of your wheelchair. But again, if you do want to transfer out of your wheelchair and you don't mind that very much, then I recommend basically a lot of those rides, including Tower of Terror. I personally have not ridden Tower of Terror yet. I'm actually kind of scared of Tower of Terror. If you have not heard the screams that come out of Tower of Terror, that's the reason why I don't like drops, to be honest. But I do love rides like Rise of the Resistance, and Millennium Falcon Smuggler's Run, and also Mickey and Minnie's Runaway Railway. So that's one of those parks where in Hollywood Studios, I really don't mind transferring out of my wheelchair for those three types of rides. Because again, I've seen how cool those rides are online. I've done the research ahead of time to know what to expect as far as speed and safety measures. And again, Disney, they always take the best safety measures for you and your party and for anybody that comes to visit the theme parks. And so again, I've already taken a look at all those things. So I already know those rides are going to be some of the rides that I want to do. Now, when it comes to Epcot, really there's only a couple of rides that you can actually, again, go in on your wheelchair. And then there are some rides that you would have to transfer out of your wheelchair on. Now, for those rides, I actually recently just discovered one of the rides that I can actually stay in my wheelchair on, which is Living with the Land, which is just a small moving boat ride. And it honestly kind of feels somewhat like It's a Small World at Magic Kingdom. So again, it teaches you all about the agriculture of the land, how fruits and vegetables are growing, and how they're doing conservation of certain plants and all that. It's just a really cool experience. Now, there's a joke that's one of the rides that's actually good for a nap. And honestly, based off my last experience on that ride, which is back in June, I would have to agree. I could have fallen asleep on that ride because, again, it goes through a lot of dark tunnels. And it's just really a soothing ride, to be honest. Now, for some of the rides that I have to transfer out of that I don't mind are things like one of my favorite rides, which is Test Track, which I've actually described it as my favorite ride in all of Disney World, in all the theme parks combined. Test Track is a fast-moving car ride that goes 0 to 60 in about 2.5 seconds. In fact, just this year, they've already updated some of the storyline of Test Track and updated some of the ride, the ride scenery itself, and some of the testing of ride vehicles in that attraction, and some of the queue line stuff, and just so many cool things. I haven't had a chance to look at all of that stuff, but yeah, it's just one of the coolest things I've ever seen. So again, Test Track is another great one. Another great one that you have to transfer out of your wheelchair to get onto the ride vehicle that I love is Frozen Ever After. And of course, this takes you through the story of the Frozen characters from the movie Frozen. And it kind of takes place in after the first movie, before you get into the second movie, and it kind of is like like a continuation of the first movie. Again, those rides are some of my favorite rides, and in fact, another favorite ride that I do remember that I haven't been on actually in a while, is Journey into Imagination with Figment. That is another ride that you can stay in your wheelchair on the ride. They actually have a ride vehicle that is accessible, for you to be able to pull up onto the ride and lock your brakes, and they might hook you in, from these little hooks that are on your wheelchair. So again, at those two theme parks, that are some of the rides in those two theme parks that I would recommend for transferring and not transferring. Now, if we move on to places like Animal Kingdom, within the Animal Kingdom, even though it's one of the biggest parks, it's really the largest park, I believe, in Walt Disney World around the whole Walt Disney World Resort. There are really only a couple of things that I could really do within the Animal Kingdom theme park. Now, the biggest accessible ride that I love there, and that's the only accessible ride that I have found that is accessible in the entire park, is, of course, the Kilimanjaro Safari. Now, this is a truck experience that you actually get onto a safari truck. You have a personalized guide driving the truck. And what they actually do is you can actually put your wheelchair onto the ride vehicle, and ride it that way. And so what they'll actually do is they'll put you right behind the driver, at the very front, right behind the driver, and they will actually lock in your wheelchair using special hooks on the front and the back of your wheelchair. Again, it's just little tiny hooks, metal hooks that they will use to lock in your wheelchair on the front and back. It only takes a couple of minutes, but you will actually go through a special line once you get through the normal line, and they'll take your party aside. Usually it's only about one other person that can ride with you in that experience, that is a companion that will sit in the seat next to you, about one or two people that can sit right next to you in the seat that is directly next to the to your wheelchair. So again, that's one of the best rides I can tell you about for if you want to stay in your wheelchair. Now, one of the rides for me that's probably one of the most surprising rides that many people, including some of my family members who might be listening to this podcast, is not just Kilimanjaro Safari, is Cali River Rapids. Now, Cali River Rapids is one of those rides where you have to transfer out of, and yes, it is a water ride. Now, if you want to talk about Cali River Rapids, kind of think of it like this, for those of you who have never been on it. It's kind of like Tiana's Bayou Adventure, where they have the big drop at the end. It's kind of like that, but the Animal Kingdom version. So it's a Wet and Wild type of ride. It spins you around. You do have a safety harness in there, but again, it spins you around, and you will get wet no matter where you're sitting. Even though the cast members are really funny and they'll tell you, "Oh no, you're not gonna get wet if you sit in those seats," that's actually a lie. You will get wet no matter what seat you are in. Now, for people in wheelchairs who are going to Animal Kingdom and they say, "Well, I want to spend from park opening to park closing, Christian, what do I do at that point?" Well, again, I've said it in a podcast before. I'm one of those guys that loves theater shows, and so I would go see shows like Finding Nemo, The Big Blue and Beyond, and Festival of the Lion King, as well as, again, like I talked in another recent episode, just a couple episodes ago, about pin trading. So I would definitely recommend, if you are a pin trader or somebody who loves shows, or both, to actually get your pins and to have that experience as well. And there also are some exploration trails that are accessible, that you can see gorillas, flamingos, and all other sorts of animals. And again, you can find those on the park map on the My Disney Experience app for Apple and for Android. So you want to make sure you get that app for all things accessibility around Walt Disney World and all of that great stuff. Now, for the last park, Magic Kingdom, this is probably the park that I would say, in my personal opinion, is the most accessible theme park of all the theme parks. Again, this is one where I can transfer onto certain rides. I can ride in my wheelchair onto certain rides. And again, this is one of my favorite parks personally because of those options. Now, For some of those options, like for staying in my wheelchair, I would recommend something like Jungle Cruise in Adventureland. I would also recommend um, Ariel's Undersea Adventure, which is in Fantasyland, as well as a few other attractions um, like the train ride, the railroad train, which is just right up the ramp above the entrance to the Magic Kingdom. Now, for the rides that you might have to transfer out of your wheelchair, that would be something like Haunted Mansion, or it would be like Dumbo. And in fact, another one I just thought about was that you can actually keep in your ride vehicle on. That's actually not open right now as of this recording, and won't be open until 2026, about mid-April or May, is actually Buzz Lightyear Space Ranger Spin, which is an interactive experience where you can shoot lasers at targets and win points. And so that's another one that I wanted to throw in there to highlight specifically that I love. But then all of the other rides there are rides that you would have to transfer out of your wheelchair onto the ride vehicle to experience those attractions. Now, again, if you're like me and you say, well, I like riding some attractions and I don't ride some attractions, don't feel pressure to ride any of these attractions that I've mentioned. You kind of need to pick and choose what feels comfortable for you. So if you're one who doesn't mind transferring at all, go on all the rides you can't use your wheelchair on if you want to transfer, if you don't mind transferring. But if you're one of those people that says, maybe I don't want to, maybe I want to stay in my wheelchair and I don't want to transfer, then I would just recommend doing the ones that you can stay in your wheelchair on, like at Magic Kingdom and all the other theme parks. Now, one of the ones that I wanted to highlight specifically that I was actually surprised about, and it's actually was really cool to the experience, was the newest one, which is Tron Light Cycle Run. Now, Tron Light Cycle Run is a roller coaster, which, for those people that might know me very well, I have to tell you, I'm not a roller coaster person by any means. I mean, I'm really, honestly, I'm afraid of roller coasters. I'm afraid of big drops and all that stuff. But this was one I had actually been excited ever since it came into it came into the announcement at one of the last D23s in Anaheim. And for me, this was one of the cool ones because I got to see some of the processes of how they make the ride on YouTube. I got to experience it, and I don't remember what Disney theme park around the world it is that already has this ride. So I was able to see exactly what it's like before I actually got to ride this ride in person. And one of the cool things about this ride that I loved was that normally the normal ride vehicle for Tron is a bike. So you would actually put your legs over on a bike. You would ride it like a bike. You would lean over, hold onto the handlebars, and they would lock in your legs. Now, for people like me who are smaller, that would never work. And especially because of balance and core strength, that just would not be a thing. Especially because this ride is a very fast ride with a lot of loops, turns, and drops. But one of the things I did discover, and I watched a video on this on YouTube a while ago, probably about 3 months ago, is that there's actually a special seat that they have created, a special ride vehicle that they have created, where you can actually transfer out of your wheelchair onto this ride vehicle and sit down and actually have a lap bar attached to the ride. Now, that one was cool because I got to sit with my brother who was on the left side of me. And so we got to ride that ride together. That was different from all the other guests. But it was a cool way to experience that attraction and to just really experience just the fun of going on my very first roller coaster. Well, guys, that's all the time I have for this week's episode of the Disable Podcast. Be sure to join me in just a couple weeks on Saturday at 8:30 p.m. right here, same place where you're streaming me right now, whether it's on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or iHeartRadio. Be sure to go like the Facebook page down below. And just a quick highlight. Also, I have a podcast store for the Disable Podcast, which is your one-stop shop for all things that promote the Disable Podcast. We have hats, we have t-shirts, keychains, ornaments for the Christmas season coming up very soon. Everything you could ever want, and we'll be adding more to the Disable Podcast store. Be sure to go check it out online. And so now, with all of that being said, Have a wonderful day, everybody, and we'll see ya
Real soon.
Thank you for joining us for this week's episode of the Disable Podcast. Be sure to use our hashtag the Disable Podcast, when sharing this podcast to all of your social media platforms. Have a wonderful day, and we'll see ya real soon.